Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Christensen. Welcome to Horror 101 with Dr. AC, a gathering place where fellow fiends the world over can discuss all things freaky and frightening. If you'd like to be part of the conversation, and I hope you do, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, maybe check out some of our previous episodes, leave a comment, and most importantly, let us know the fright flicks you'd like to see us discuss in the future. That kind of engagement is exactly what we're here for, and it really does make a difference. We're all about sharing the scare, and we want to hear from you. It's amazing to believe that The Exorcist has been in our lives for a half century, because for many fans, it's hard to imagine the horror landscape without it. Its release in the final days of December 1973 triggered a seismic shift in popular culture, and the world has literally never been the same. William Peter Blatty's 1971 novel had already become a sensation in the publishing world, and so a film version seemed inevitable, although it's unlikely that anyone imagined so much of the sensational and explicit material from the printed page would end up on the big screen. Setting aside the sensational special effects, the idea of a 12-year-old girl spewing shocking curse words and pea soup in equal measure in a Hollywood picture is still incredible to conceive, even in the adventurous, risk-taking environment of the early 70s. And yet it happened, and the process became the highest grossing film of its time, garnering 10 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture and Best Director, honors which no horror film had ever before achieved. Tonight, we'll be discussing The Exorcist legacy, its sequels, prequels, ripoffs, and lasting impact on pop culture. I'm grateful to have with us another fantastic panel of guests, all shining stars in the Chicago theater firmament. Michelle Corvée, Katie McLean Hainsworth, Christopher Hainsworth, Mandy Walsh, and Christopher Walsh. Welcome, everyone. You can unmute yourself and let the fun begin as we discuss The Exorcist from 1973, celebrating its 50th anniversary. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dealing with a few demons on this side as well. So I want to just kind of go around because everybody has an Exorcist story. It's one of those films that we kind of do remember where we were, when we saw it, etc. Why don't we start with Chris Hainsworth?
I was aware of The Exorcist for many years before I saw it. I was introduced to the concept of The Exorcist on watching soap with my parents in the 70s because of Father Tim and Corinne's baby being possessed by the devil and all of the allusions to the movie. So there was a lot of cultural seepage before I actually got to the movie, which didn't happen until I was in high school, which now seems crazy, but like, why would you watch The Exorcist as a child? That seems like a really bad idea. So my brother and his friends were having like a sleepover, and they rented Faces of Death and The Exorcist. They watched Faces of Death first and then started watching The Exorcist at like 12:30 at night. So between 12:30 and 2:30 in the morning was my introduction to The Exorcist after having watched Faces of Death. So that's how I came to
Poor
it.
thing.
Perfect.
It's the right order, though. You gotta.
It is.
That's true. That's true.
It was the Barbie Oppenheimer of its day.
My experience is similar but different. I was babysitting the first time I saw the original Exorcist, or at least the segment of it that I was able to stand. I was babysitting. I had put the kids to bed. I was probably about 12. So kids were in bed, lights were down. I was looking for something to just, occupy myself until the parents came home. And I think, if I recall correctly, I tuned in to right about the time Chris McNeil's party was going on, and Reagan comes down the stairs, and then I was able to hang on until some very bad things were happening. And I'll never forget running towards the television with my eyes covered to turn it off. And I was so terrified that I ended up sitting on the stairs, waiting for the parents, just curled up into a ball, waiting for them to rescue me, essentially, because I was in their dark house. I was 12. I was watching The Exorcist in a dark house that wasn't my own. And one other little tidbit that's come back to me in just thinking about this discussion is that one of my parents' best friends was a Catholic priest who absolutely is Jason Miller's doppelganger. And he was one of these guys that he used to protest the Vietnam War by handcuffing himself to the White House. And so he was a very big figure in my childhood. He's my younger brother's godfather. And so I don't think I realized until recently that was another way that everything that was happening just was so real to me, because I also was like, that's Father Jim. He's doing the things. Holy shit. So yeah, it was really very devastating as far as a frightening movie experience. And that's the bar has been set for me ever since then, that if you can't scare me to that level, I'm not interested. And that's an impossible bar to meet.
I think that is something that's interesting about horror films, that when we see them at a younger age, like, it is more impressionable. I think anybody coming to The Exorcist as an adult and after 50 years of horror films, it's going to be difficult to scare you at that same level. Rosemary's Baby and Night of the Living Dead are kind of seen as the beginning of modern horror, but really The Exorcist changed the game for everything. And I think there's kind of before Exorcist and after Exorcist when it comes to horror films. Chris Walsh.
Hey, so I was always aware of The Exorcist. It was just something that I feel like I don't remember a time that I didn't know that it existed. And certain images like the green vomit was just something I was always aware of. And the music was sort of pervasive. I just remember always knowing, like, instantly you could hear that and that's from The Exorcist. But then I was about 15 at a Halloween party, and some people had taken over a back room and were playing horror movies. And I poked my head in to see what was going on, and there was I didn't recognize the movie that they were watching, so I asked what it was, and their response was, "Duh, it's The Exorcist." And I realized at that moment that, oh, I've never actually seen this movie. And so I was curious, so I just kind of stayed and stood and watched. Ended up standing there for two hours in the doorway watching this movie, and it was fascinating.
I feel like I've always was aware of The Exorcist. I very clearly remember my mom had the book on her bookshelf, and like always looking at that and being like, what's that? What is that about? That's creepy. But I don't think I saw it until I think it was on regular television. So it was edited for TV. And I don't think I saw it uncut probably until like 5th or 6th grade, because that's when I really started to get into horror movies and just being kind of like, oh, like with the crucifix and the that wasn't in the TV edits. But yeah, I think I was always aware of it because it was so pervasive in pop culture. I mean, I think it was parodied like 50 million times over. So it was always kind of there for me.
And Katie.
Are you ready for this? We were the first people to have cable in our neighborhood. When the moment that you could get cable, we got cable. So we nobody knew anything about it. So there were no like parental concerns about having cable. It was just we had more stuff to watch in our house than anybody else had in their house. We had 4 movie channels. We had HBO, we had the movie channel, Showtime, and Cinemax. I remember what stations they were on our local cable box: 15, 16, 18, and 19. I don't know what happened to 17. And HBO was marvelous because they would only show R-rated movies after 8 o'clock at night. There was a little placard that came up that still I could hear completely in my head. This motion picture has been rated R by the Motion Picture Association of America. HBO will show this feature only at night. The other channels did not give a fuck. They would show those movies whenever, wherever. We used to watch The Shining at 11 o'clock while we played with Legos on Sunday mornings and stuff. So my friend Susan and I watched The Exorcist maybe 700 times. Like we watched it whenever it was on, whatever it was on. We loved it so much. we read the book at the library. Like we went to the library, we couldn't check it out. We would go to the library and read the book in stages at the library. I think we watched it that many times, not only because it was like forbidden and stuff, but because we didn't understand what was going on. Like there are such dramatic and wonderful and very highly effective plot and time jumps in this movie that we literally were like, how did they get to this point in this? How did they know that this? We had to keep watching it. So that launched a lifelong love of it. I've seen everything.
Just this past week?
Yeah, just this past week we rewatched. Just finished rereading the book yesterday. I watched the television show. I haven't watched the parodies. They don't really interest me that much, but this is a part of who I am. This movie is part of what defines me. I think the things that scare you tell you just as much about people as the things they love and stuff. So like, this is really a great example of it. I've also been to the Exorcist stairs. I went there on my junior year of college spring break with my friend Martin. We were completely stoned. It was the most terrifying night of my life. There is no wall on the right-hand side when you are standing at the top of those stairs. Like Chris's house isn't there. It's just a big open space and an incredibly steep drop. And I stood at the top of them for an incredibly long time before I found the courage to walk down them. It was so terrifying. So yeah, that's me and The Exorcist.
Well done. We have also been to the Exorcist stairs. We went there, I think in 2007. And I thought for a moment you were going to say that you hurled yourself down the stairs just to see how much fun that would be.
See if I could turn my own head around.
You know, I think I could make it.
Jason Miller's an amateur.
Yeah.
You could not
feel anything.
I saw it on regular TV, and I was probably like, I want to say like 13 or 14. I remember that I watched it in the summertime because it was light when I started the movie. And by the end of the movie, it had gotten dark. And because I was so terrified, I hadn't moved from my chair. And when the screen finally went black and the end credits came up and you heard Tubular Bells, I like slowly crept up to the TV, turned it off. Of course, then I was in pitch black, which was no better. And I, crept over, turned on the light, but I felt like something had shifted. I was like, I've never encountered anything like that. And again, this is the cut version. And I've spent the past, how many ever years trying to figure out why The Exorcist works the way it does. And I think part of it is that the scares are juxtaposed with just regular life. And it's not a movie that its underlying tone is to scare you throughout. This thing is happening. We used to say that, Jaws is a drama about a shark, and The Exorcist is a drama about possession. And everything's handled very realistically and handled in a very human and recognizable world where something extraordinary is happening.
It's also a drama about a priest who's losing his faith and a priest who's carrying on too long past his prime because he knows he has one more fight to fight. It's about an actress who is trying to shift her career. It's about so many other things than just the little girl who's possessed. Right. I think that's why it works for me.
Yeah. And I ended up, so I did competitive speech in high school and college. And in high school, I said, I want to do a selection from The Exorcist. And my coach was like, I don't know if that's a good idea. And I said, well, it's what I want to do. So I did it. And, fast forward to, I qualified for nationals with it, doing, like all 7 characters in the final, exorcism scene. So it has been with me for a long time. And I love this film. It's kind of, my touchstone. And like you, Katie, I've seen it a lot, and yet each time I'm surprised at how well it still works.
Can I respond directly to Katie? Like you, if there's something that appeals to me, something that I really dig, normally I dig in hard, and I want to see it all, know it all. I want to be that person who I've looked under every stone. This is probably the only movie that I purposely put on a shelf. I didn't want to know anything else. And I have Mr. Springsteen's poster behind me. He says something during one of his solo shows where somebody was asking him about his artistic process, and he answered something like, talking about music is like talking about sex. And this will all come back around. Talking about music is like talking about sex. Can you describe it? Are you supposed to? And I would, and that stuck with me, because anytime I try to dig into something that really means something to me, that's an art, a piece of art, I always feel that, like, how can you describe that visceral feeling? And should you? Because are you going to take the power away of that original viewing experience? And on the one hand, I totally dug into, for example, the Alien franchise. I mean, the first Alien is the closest I've come to how I felt to my first viewing of The Exorcist. That's a movie that genuinely scared me. But for The Exorcist, it became like this sacred thing that, no, you only watch it once every 10 years. No, you don't watch sequels. You don't talk about them. You don't, no. And because I've never been so scared, and I wanted to preserve that golden moment. So I know what I know about it, and I know why I love it. But I when I was listening to you going, yeah, that normally would have been my instinct to dig in and dig in. With this movie, I just refused.
I'll just reiterate that I was 7 or 8 or 9 and had in no way the presence of mind to be able to say, I'm not going to dig into this thing that interests me so much because I want to preserve it. That was just like, fuck that. I'll never get tired of this movie. You know what I mean? And I haven't, I'll say I haven't. But the things that move me about it have shifted. The only thing about this movie that still scares the living shit out of me is the medical procedure that she has where they drain the cerebral fluid from her brain.
Looks so real.
It is so realistic. There's a serial killer in that scene too, like an actual serial killer, which I didn't know until like 2 weeks ago. But yeah, so that is that it's the real stuff. It is Chris begging Father Karras to just help her, right out of the book, word for word. It is the image of Marin facing off with the demon statue at the beginning. You're not going to know what that means for like 2 hours. It's Karras being haunted by his mother coming in and out of the subway. That's the stuff. Like, I giggle when she crab walks down the thing in the extended cut now, and I giggle when she's doing stuff with that crucifix. But like, but it's the flare of the candles in the attic. It's Carl adamantly insisting there are no rats in the attic, and all that dread that still stays with me when they don't know what's going on. It's her telling the astronaut, "You're all going to die up there." Like, that stuff that's going to haunt me till the day I go.
Mm-hmm.
I also reread the novel this past week, and I'm stunned at how much of that novel ends up in
so
movie.
much of it.
Like, I was like, wow, they got all that in.
Major plot line that is cut, and it's not a major plot line, is Carl and Willie's daughter, and Willie's name, of course. The housekeeper gets a name in the book that she doesn't get in the movie, but like, they have a daughter who's addicted to heroin. Willie thinks she's dead, and Carl's been going to see her. It's what makes him a candidate for Kinderman, that he may have killed Dennings. Like, it's this tiny little subplot that gets snipped from the movie without any loss whatsoever. But also, I marvel how reading the book and watching the extended cut, those things do almost nothing to explain the time jumps and the plot skips that the movie roots its unsettling nature on. That I read the book with, like, I want to figure out what the time frame is here, and it doesn't help you. They go to Dayton for 2 weeks. You find that out.
This is the type of horror that works for me personally. If I see a haunted house, I'm not going in it.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to die. If there's a haunted hospital, haunted whatever, I stay away. This is about, we're just going about our normal lives, and there are so many metaphors that can be wrapped up into this movie. You can resupply demonic possession with illness, mental illness, all of these horrible things. We're just going about our daily lives, doing what we always do, and suddenly there is something in our home that we don't understand, can't confront and can't solve on our own, and it is ruining all of our lives. That is what gets to me. I mean, there are images in this movie that I can now, the shock of the first time is off, and I'm like, that's still horrific, but I can process it. And yet somehow several days later, I'll be in my house in the dark and I'll get creeped out. I will just get creeped out. And I'm a 53-year-old man who's like, I've got to walk into that dark room and do something. Oh gosh. Oh gosh. Oh, I know there's nothing in there. I know there's nothing in there. There's nothing in there. Okay. But I still have those feelings, you know, probably 40 years after I saw it and, you know, 50 years after its release. So that is the type of horror movies that affect me the most.
With regard to the sequels, prequels, offshoots, etc., you know, how have those influenced your experience of the movie?
I was kind of curious to go back and watch this because it's been a minute since I've watched it, but I've seen so many other possession movies since then, and they've all kind of like focused on like puberty, dementia and the aging, and there's always that kind of like demonization of these things happening in somebody. And I was kind of curious to see if I missed that from like previous viewings, with Reagan being, you know, a 12-year-old girl, and it's not in there. And I was kind of relieved to see that. It was kind of refreshing just to see like, no, she's just a normal kid who this awful things happens to her. And so that was really kind of interesting to see how like since then so many other movies have tried to like pile on all of this other stuff, and I don't know necessarily how successful they've been because of that.
I'd say, well, particularly in the sequels, having watched, because we watched the Schrader version and the Harlan version of prequel, and then we watched 2. All of those really get into like foreign mysticism and tried to like really other culture, you know, they like really othering different cultures and being like these backwards people who are, you know, the funny thing is like the Schrader even makes the point that colonialism is bad while being colonialistic itself. But in trying to exoticize everything, it actually diminishes the terror because it's, you're in a strange place, you don't know what's going on, there's all these things. That itself almost diffuses the actual terror of loss of control and inability to fight off something that you don't understand because you're already in a position, in a place that you don't understand.
I very rarely think that telling me where the villain comes from in a movie is helps in any way. I don't like the Star Wars prequels. I don't care. Hated that Tim Burton Willy Wonka movie and stuff. I'm talking villains specifically, but I found both of those two prequels about Father Merrin phenomenally boring. He's so much more interesting when he's just this old guy who walks in and Damien says, do you want to know the details of the case? And he says, why?
Yeah.
This is what he does. This is what he's here for. This is it for him. That's so much more interesting to me than the 5 hours of Stellan Skarsgård making 2 different movies on the same set. Like it was so crazy and yet so boring. Now, so I'll say that all the stuff that we watched afterward, none of it diminishes the power of The Exorcist for me, but also almost none of it feels at all connected to The Exorcist. Exorcist 3 comes closest because, of course, it's written by William Peter Blatty and based on his own book, and it features Kinderman and Dyer, played by 2 different actors than played them in the original movie. But the banter is there and that wonderful dialogue. Then you only get that for like 20 minutes. And after that, it's the shit show of studio interference, right? The only thing that I've watched that comes close to feeling like the experience of watching The Exorcist for the first time was the television show, the 2016,
17, I think.
17 television show. We watched the first season when it aired, and we watched, I didn't realize this till this past week, but we only watched the first episode of season 2 and then discontinued. So I went and watched the whole thing and very much enjoyed it and felt that a lot of it was very evocative of it was about the people. They weren't the most well thought out characters all around. There were a lot of them. It was a lot to juggle, but it did feel more like this is the thing that's tearing this family apart. But the story is about the family.
for me, works about the TV series and about the original movie that has diminishing returns in Exorcist 2, 3, and the prequels. How much that actually goes unexplained. The amount of skepticism that every character goes into it with. The only exception maybe being Marin himself, who you can tell by his physical reaction in that prologue that he's upset about whatever he's found, but there's never any explanation. They don't even name the demon, who has a name that you never hear in the movie. And then there's just one shot during the final exorcism scene that ties it back to the beginning. You know, they even explain that what the demon itself says about itself isn't true. So there's no explanation. There, you don't get to learn any like technical details of how possession works, which some of the later movies try to kind of explain in various versions of Handwavium that work really not at all. Or they try to, you know, just kind of psych you out with surreal passages from Exorcist 2. They don't mention the word possession until over halfway through the film because
nice
they
slow burn.
spend so much time world building and going through every possible other route to explain what's happening before they finally get to this, that you have no choice but to believe them.
Father Karras says, you know, the simplest explanation is usually the answer.
Yeah.
And the simplest explanation is this child is
She's
actually
possessed.
possessed. And they
They're all
go
like, no.
through so many, like everybody just runs up into that wall of like, well, it can't be that. It can't, you know, because even to the priest, the simplest explanation is that she has mental issues rather than the fact that this child is floating above a bed and things are flying around the room. It's like, well, there's got to be some other sort of mental illness explanation. So it's even people of faith, with the exception of Father Marin, every time they're running this, it's like, well, it can't be that, even though that is the simplest explanation.
Yeah, in the book, you know, they go through a whole thing of like, one of my favorite scenes in the movie is when it's just Damien and Regan possessed, and she opens the drawer and he closes and asks her to do it again, and she's like, no, I won't. And you're like, but can she? Is she fucking with him? What, you know, it's a great scene.
In
But like,
time.
they go into great detail in the book of talking about how, you know, it might be possible that humans can affect things with an energy in their minds that we haven't discovered yet. And I'm like, why is that more feasible than she is possessed? Like, what's the difference between those two theories in this world where neither of them are provably true?
Well, I think at least in the book, I don't know how in depth they get in the film, but the point is they cannot authorize an exorcism unless there are no other alternatives. And that's why telekinesis is okay.
Yeah.
Telepathy is okay because that's not a demon.
She
And we
pulled that
can't,
from my mind. Yeah.
you know, exactly. It's just like, oh, how frustrating. But I think that's kind of goes back to Chris McNeil going, just fix this. Just help me. Won't somebody help me?
And in both the movie and the book, when it comes down to getting the exorcism, when he finally does take it, there is not like this big argument. They're like, well, we should get Father Marin then, don't you think? Yeah, he's at Woodstock. He's writing a book. Yeah. There's not a big like trial that they have to go through, that like if this was the Steven Spielberg version of the movie, he would make them go through proving that she needs an exorcism and stuff. When it gets down to it, he's like, I gotta get this girl an exorcism, and the church is like, okay.
I feel like the performances. This is another reason why when people say to me, what scares you, what's going to work for you, it's always going to come down to performances. I mean, I could watch the dumbest scenario ever, but if it's accompanied by great acting, I mean, Max von Sydow, my great love, Emperor Ming. His physicality in the first Exorcist movie, it tells such a story of exhaustion. I've been here before. I know what this is. And anytime anyone's ever watched a movie with me, I want answers by the end. I want answers. If I don't get answers, I'm going to be really mad. I'm thrilled when, like Chris, as you said, when Marin says, no, I don't need to know anything. Let's go. Let's do this. It's like not having those answers and seeing I saw so much without him saying anything because it was such a masterful acting exercise.
I want to say that for many, many years, I did not know how much makeup he wore.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
And so when I saw Hannah and her sisters, my head exploded. And for a long time, I told myself this great story about how he just acted that old. But no, he was in makeup for like 3 or 4 hours every day to do his very small role in the film. But to your point, what a stunning
So
performance.
Beautiful, so beautiful.
And they
I
added
mean,
back in the scene about how he thinks it's not about the person they're possessing, but the people around them, and to make them despair and believe that God could never love them. Like, that's just the most beautiful moment in such a horrible morass of crap that's going on around them.
yeah, and the absolute perfection of Marin and Karis together with both of the issues they're bringing in. I mean, Jason Miller, but I could watch that guy eat pancakes and I'd be thrilled. Like, oh, look how he eats the pancakes. I mean, he's so fascinating. He's a fascinating actor, and I thought his work in this, and I did find out later that he was actually on the road to the priesthood, I think, in his real life. So bringing that sort of gravitas to it. The two of them, I mean, of course, Ellen Burstyn is Ellen Burstyn.
Who lobbied for this role violently. It was written about, like, based on Shirley MacLaine and her daughter. Shirley MacLaine went and made some other no-name possession movie, and Ellen Burstyn was like, I'll take it. I got it. This is damn good. She came in and just mopped the floor with it.
The reason why they got Dick Smith was because of his expertise in aging makeup. And then he somehow, since he was on board, they're like, well, let's also have you do all the special effects makeup. And Dick Smith's like, I got this. Because the transformation of Regan over the course of the film, and the fact that sometimes you're not even looking at Linda Blair, you're looking at her stunt double, Eileen Dietz, and you would never know the difference. Like, that transformation is so extraordinary. Most of the actors, Max von Sydow was probably the best known actor at that point. Lee J. Cobb had been a veteran, from 12 Angry Men and other films, but he wasn't a big star. But when you think about this ensemble of actors, it's almost impossible to think of anybody else playing these parts now, because they do such an amazing job. Lee J. Cobb's incarnation of Kinderman is so wonderful. It feels pulled right from the book as well. As Katie mentioned, like, William Peter Blatty, came from kind of a comedy background. And so that kind of back and forth banter is really his wheelhouse. The Exorcist was a complete diversion for him, because he'd written the Blake Edwards A Shot in the Dark, the Clouseau film. And so the banter that you hear between Karis and Kinderman, and I love Lee J. Cobb's kind of Columbo approach to it all, of like, I mentioned this only in passing, and one more thing, and it's just so wonderfully modulated, and it's even more emphasized in the book. But kind of to Michelle's point, Jason Miller, who was not known as an actor at the time, he just nails it, and he nails it so hard. I love the moment that he goes, talks to his, sees his mother is in duress, and comes back and just beats the crap out of a boxing bag for 3 seconds. And that tells us so much about that guy. It's like, yeah, he's a priest. Yeah, he's struggling, and he's so angry and has no outlet for it. And it's like, there you go. There's that little glimpse. And that's what makes me think of this, like, this film needed to happen in the 70s, because that's when we were willing to throw little character bits like that in and be like, it's fine. Doesn't move the plot, but it tells us everything we need to know.
Rereading the book and being just hyper familiar with the original movie now, fascinating, great work by Friedkin to just take whole pages of dialogue and turn them into one moment. That Chris and Damien have a whole conversation about unfiltered cigarettes that is replaced in the movie simply by Karis giving Chris MacNeil a cigarette. She lights it and immediately takes it out and pulls tobacco from her teeth, because there's no filter to get rid of it. Like, it's so specific. And to me, it had to be, knowing Friedkin's work, purposeful.
Yeah, speaking of, as all of us have worked on adaptations in one form or another, it's a visual medium. Having adapted things for audio and the stage, you can get so much more out of one look, one person looking at a thing that you would have to transcribe in a book. You'd have to put into dialogue or into a descriptive paragraph, and the simplicity of building character through moments with the punching bag or the moment with the cigarette, or in this movie, helps to sustain the tension of the horror as well while building character at the same time. We know nothing about Father Merrin in this movie other than sometime in his past he was involved in a month-long exorcism in Africa. That is all
Almost
we know
killed him.
about him.
It almost killed him. Yeah.
And it almost killed him. Everything else is from what you see and what Max von Sydow does. And this is something you don't see so much anymore, is the trust in the audience to stick with it, and the audience's willingness to stick with it. We can talk about how modern audiences consume horror and the, instant gratification junky aspect of, well, it wasn't scary, nothing jumped out, nothing did this, nothing did that. I'm like, you refuse to meet it on its level and engage with it.
I don't want to get off actors without talking about William O'Malley, who played Father Dyer and who was actually a priest. Like, he's so unbelievably good and charming in this movie. And he said he was too busy to come back for The Exorcist 3.
Good for him. You mentioned sound, and I just want to throw in on Mercedes McCambridge, because talk about scary. There is nothing like that for me, and they couldn't duplicate it in the sequels. They just couldn't.
Colleen
do
Dewhurst gave it her all.
Yeah.
Mercedes McCambridge. Holy shit.
She used to ask for whiskey and something else I can't remember to get the voice right.
Probably those unfiltered cigarettes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
she wanted to get it right. There was a big controversy around Linda Blair getting nominated for Best Supporting Actress Oscar, not just because of her stunt double did a lot of the physical stuff, but because so much of her performance was considered effective because of Mercedes McCambridge. And Mercedes McCambridge had at first asked to be left off the credits to give Linda Blair that moment in the spotlight. And then when the movie came out, she was like, I would like to be credited.
The amount of detail that Friedkin brought into sequences like the medical scenes that add this entire layer of verisimilitude that makes it easier to buy into the really weird shit that happens later. They very purposefully, in those medical scenes, don't focus on Regan's experience of it and just focus on the technical details, which makes it kind of more horrifying. Drilling in on the minute details of that makes it feel horrific and like some sort of torture scene in a way that just showing her face, experiencing it, somehow wouldn't have.
And I always wonder when I hear about people running out of the theater, when people were seeing it, in its first run, you hear about people vomiting and people running out. I always used to wonder, like, well, which parts? Was it seeing Regan in full makeup spewing pea soup, or was it those medical?
We rewatched Exorcist 3 recently, and I found myself contrasting the efforts in 3 to add any sort of realism compared to part 1, and how badly they dropped the ball. Because, Exorcist 3 tries to start off as a police procedural. And I found myself the entire time just being like, why is he picking that up without gloves? Why aren't they doing the carelessness with which those kind of things were put together in 3 really ruined it for me in a way that the care and detail that was put into part 1 enhanced the entire movie for me.
Tagging on to something that Chris just said about the medical procedures, we watched the version you've never seen and the director's cut in the past week as well, which are the same movie. So in case you were going to rent one, or
you wanted to spend any money, and just one is good. Yeah.
But yes, Michelle's gone away. The thing that I noticed so much this time was the comparison of those medical scenes to the Exorcist scenes. The torture that they do put Regan through in those medical scenes, and the blasé way, and the doctors are like, well, I don't see anything. Should we do it to her again? Well, maybe. Let's try this. And you contrast that with, well, now she's tied to a bed and she's strapped down to a medical table and tortured, and then strapped to a bed and tortured with holy water.
And she is being internally tortured all the time
at
Right.
the same time. And
by the
it's-
demon.
Once again, going back to the simplest answer, we will just keep torturing this child until we finally get an answer that we like, while not curing her at the same time. The whole medical aspect of it versus, well, at least the priests are working to a concrete solution of getting this thing out of her, and that torture serves a point rather than just, well, I didn't say anything. What should we do to her next?
Well, and piggybacking on that, the idea of, we never really get an answer in the very first movie of why her, and we have that little tiny clip of her messing around with the Ouija board in the basement. And I'll tell you what, I never touched a fucking Ouija board in my,
You know what else we get?
in my life, because that idea has been planted that, well, could happen to you too. And
We don't.
I remember doing light as a feather, stiff as a board during sleepovers, and I swear to God, we levitated somebody. I'm sure we did. And but whenever the Ouija board came out, I was like, I'm out. I'm not touching that.
We never get a why, Reagan, but the Ouija board is how, Reagan. And the closest we get to why is a blink and you will miss it. And even if you don't blink, you will probably miss it headline on the magazine cover that she's reading when Chris comes into her bedroom and takes it away from her and complains about the picture and everything. There's a headline on there about her dad abandoning them or something, like Howard McNeil calls it quits. His name is Howard. Howdy. That's where it all comes from. Chose her because she's vulnerable and would let her in because she is in the middle of this divorce, acrimonious divorce between her parents.
Basically, it becomes a battleground, right? Like Reagan's body becomes this battleground, and it's about these people proving themselves. It's about them conquering the other side. In the case of the medical, it's figuring this out and showing that we are able to defeat it. Or in the spirituality, we are going to defeat this demon. And Reagan just becomes collateral damage. When we get to the end and we see Reagan's face, after the demon has left, and like she's just, I feel like they wanted to give us a happier ending, and so they didn't give us a realistic look of what she must have looked like by the end. And she's going to have, she would have facial scarring the rest of her life. Like this is a devastating experience. There was something that resonated for me in reading of the book that I've heard a million times in the movie. What an excellent day for an exorcism. You would like that. Wouldn't that drive you out? It would bring us together. You and her, you and us. Talking about Karis and the demon, which is where it all ends up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I have to wonder if maybe that's the why, is knowing how this is all going to play out and going, I want to possess a priest and force him to kill himself. That would be a true victory.
Well, I think the forcing him to kill himself is an unexpected outcome for the demon. But I will say a lot of what went through my mind the past month while we were watching these movies is, why is this called The Exorcist? Why is it not called The Possessed? Why is it not called The Mother of the Possessed? Why is it not called The Priest Who's Losing His Faith? Why is it not called The Detective Who's like, whose movie is this? Whose story is this? And only after finishing the book yesterday have I finally landed on a position that I never had before, which is that the exorcist is in fact Karis, since he's the one who does it. And I've always just thought, well, it's Marin. He's the famous exorcist of the title. And even though there's only in the movie for about 10 minutes tops, but I think now that it's definitely Damien, and it is his story from the beginning, even though we don't see him until the first scene with Chris in the movie, when they're filming the movie and he's watching and giggling and so entertained by it, that I really think that this is his story.
Well, as you say, he's the one who does it. He drives the demon out.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we end up with that famous, the poster shot.
Yeah,
is of course Marin, and so
that's a red. I think that's a distraction.
Yeah, I love what you just said, Katie. That's awesome.
It's a brilliant image. How do you not put that on the poster?
Right.
I mean, but I don't think that's necessary.
So,
I'm sort of with Katie in that I believe it's about the exorcist, and I find Father Karras interesting because it's not that he is losing his belief in God. He is just angry at him. I think he still believes God exists. He's just lost faith that he's a caring God who loves.
I think
That-
he's lost faith in himself.
Agreed.
Yes.
Hmm.
But so it's not that it's not his position is there is no God and I've wasted
Yeah.
my life. It's that I've believed in this God, and what do I? It's very Job, and that like,
What
hey,
he did to my
I
mom.
did everything I was supposed to do. Why you do it? Why are you torturing my mom? Why are you torturing this kid?
Why?
No.
Well, if you're raised in the Catholic Church, as I was, God damn it, this is this. Here are the answers. You stick with the answers. Period. End of story. If you question that, that's very naughty. And Karras is questioning. He's not supposed to.
There's one scene that's always kind of bothered me, and that's the fact that when her head turns completely around.
Yeah.
And because I think Blatty even said it on set, he was like, just because she's possessed doesn't make it, we can't venture into the impossible.
Yeah.
And that
You
is
know,
how
even-
Burke Dennings died, right?
That's right. And that's
Yeah.
why it's there. And we have that great moment of her turning her head and talking back, saying, you know, look what she did, your cunning daughter. But the fact that it goes all the way around, and only
It doesn't
recently,
even snap back.
only recently did I find an
Show it
explanation
by.
for it that I can live with after years and years of being, well, that's okay. I'll just keep going. It's that it cuts back to Damien at that point, and you go, was that a hallucination on his part?
I
How
think
much of
that too.
this
That's what
is
he
a
sees.
hallucination? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's such an iconic moment though. And you feel like there is nothing this demon can't do. And you are totally outclassed, poor human priests. You know, good luck.
We talked earlier about how it is so much a part of the cultural consciousness and my own experience with the movie that my own mind had resequenced the movie to make it more explainable. In my memory, she came down into the party and peed on the carpet, and that was the beginning of going to the doctors and stuff like that. In reality, just one day she's at the doctor. Everything's fine. Then one day she's at the doctor. She's acting strange. There's no inciting incident that we see. It's just one day they're at the doctor's. She's humping the door. She's, swearing at physicians. We never see the inciting incident. So in my mind, I had created one. So I think it's interesting to watch this movie today in terms of you can see the movie that would be made today with the same material, and it wouldn't be as good or as interesting because it would be overly literal and connect too many dots and sort of take away that discombobulation you feel.
I think we're about to get that movie. I think based on the trailer for the new Exorcist that we watched yesterday.
Yeah.
We're about to
Price
get
of
that
wine.
movie. Yeah.
Mandy, you saw the TV show, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, because I think you were the first one on our email thread to champion it. Does it do what we're talking about in terms of, dotting every I and making it feel like a horror series?
I haven't watched it recently, but I'm particularly zoned in on the first season. I apparently watched all of the second season. I don't remember it, but Chris has told me that I had watched the whole second season. But the first season, it's a slow burn over the course of the season. And I don't know. I mean, I'm also a little biased in that I think it's a good love letter to the city of Chicago because it's shot here. And I was really disappointed when season 2 went to the Pacific Northwest. I was like, oh. But I don't know. I think it tried to stick to the original movie in structure, at least in my mind, or that's how my impression of it was at the time.
It's a good show. It does a lot, and it evokes the feeling of the movie, but it does give you, there are a lot of scary moments.
Yeah,
it does give you a lot more information. It does not replicate that feeling of you've been thrown into the middle of a scene or the middle of a moment or the middle of something happening that The Exorcist does so well. But it's not dumb like so many other things have been dumb. It attempts to be realistic
Hmm.
Yeah.
except that there are demons, like it's about the priests, it's about the family, it does that stuff really, really well.
Hmm.
But it does feed you a lot more.
For a network television show, it is surprisingly well constructed and surprisingly scary. But it does have some of the flaws that a network television show is going to bring to that kind of
It's
material.
too many episodes.
Mhm.
Only 10 per season, though.
I know there's just too many. There's filler in
That's
both
enough.
seasons that it's like, yeah, let's just get to the
Yeah.
good stuff. But
I think both seasons are good for their own reasons, but they tell two very different stories, and there are only a handful of characters that overlap. The first season, I think, is much stronger, partly because it has the added advantage of reintroducing you to the world. Yes, it does kind of go into greater detail of like what the priest's past experiences were, and you do see some flashbacks and that sort of thing. But for most of the season, while I felt like I was watching a well-constructed show, and a well-written show and a well-acted show, that was also about possession, I kind of wondered if like they just somehow bought the rights to use the name just as a marketing gimmick. But then about 3/4 of the way through, they very explicitly tie it to the original movie in a way that made me just go like, oh, that's what I was waiting for. And I got so excited when that moment happened.
It was a good payoff.
Yeah.
For many
for sure.
flaws for me.
Mhm.
I also like that that first season sort of explores similar themes that are introduced in the book. I don't know if they're introduced in the book, but they're certainly introduced in the movie, of that, like, Father Karras is a psychiatrist and a priest. So there's a very sort of secular aspect to the church that he belongs to, as opposed to the old school demons are real and we're in a war against Satan that Father Merrin represents. That it's one thing to be like, oh, well, God is love and he loves all of his children and he really wants the best for us. And that sort of modern church aspect versus the, old school, no, if we don't win, everybody's going to hell, warrior priest aspect of it. That, I find that dichotomy fascinating, that both of these priests belong to the same church and have completely different experiences within that church itself and different ways of handling, until, of course, the young priest gets pulled along and is forced to confront the fact that, oh no, this is all real. This is all real. This is terrifying. And now I am literally putting my life on the line in a war that I only kind of sort of believed existed in the first place.
Right.
So where does Richard Burton land in terms of
He lands firmly in the, oh my God, what am I doing here? Camp.
Was he paying
Jesus
alimony?
Christ, it's so
Yes, he was. I mean, somewhere
Yeah,
he was paying alimony at all times.
Probably lost a bar bet.
But
He
it's
looks
funny that we were talking
completely
about the medical
stoned
aspects.
throughout it.
We were talking about the medical aspects of one and how terrifying they are. And then in two, it's like, oh, here's a machine that I invented that you can enter people's dreams.
And
It's like,
we'll just leave it in a hotel room. Like it's not the most amazing invention that everybody's ever like the CIA hasn't come and taken this machine by now. Like it's so, in this crazy octagonal roomed glass wall therapy session.
I know when I
The
like to go
whole
into
thing is
therapy,
like,
I
yeah,
like
I
to
want
see what everybody
everybody
else is
watching.
doing at any given time as well.
Christ. I was like, oh, what is this place? This is like the chocolate factory.
And it also makes me, speaking of sequels, like, I'm angry that it's called Exorcist 3, because that means that Exorcist 2 also exists.
Yeah.
And at the end of Exorcist 2, they blow up that damn house, which wasn't even the McNeils in the first place.
Yeah.
They were renting it. They were on location. There was a rental. That
And the
it
two
wasn't
of them
theirs.
walk off together. They walk off together in
Yeah.
the ruins. What?
Phenomenal.
Where are you going?
It's the most when Kitty Wynn sets herself on fire, I was like, what? Has she been like this the whole time? I thought it was crazy for her to
so
come back to the
mad.
McNeils in the first place, but what the hell, Sharon?
Well, and that so The Exorcist 2, The Heretic, which is what we've been referencing, by the way. Like that movie is trying so hard to be an Exorcist movie and not be an Exorcist movie at the same time. Like it is just
It's
like
the Prometheus of its time.
it is bouncing off of the guardrails on both sides of the highway. And I mean, I love that, like that one actually has a cast, like a cast that and, like, you had Louise Fletcher was coming off of her
She's
Oscar win, and she's
so
so
bad
horrible.
at it.
You got
I
Richard
mean, nothing
Burton.
to work with. There's nothing to work with in the
For
script.
sure. But you
wow,
kind
they're
of go,
all
you go, oh wait, was that a mistake? Like, did we give you an Oscar 2 years ago? And maybe we shouldn't have.
They are all there for the paycheck. They are
Yep.
clearly all just there for the paycheck.
But you could say the same thing about Burton too. If like, I'm sorry, you're gonna
for
need
sure.
to turn that in. You're gonna need to turn that in. Sorry. You can have this paycheck, but you gotta hand us your Oscar. It's one or the other. You don't get to keep both.
He's
You don't
hiding
get to
it
keep
under his priest's
And you got
robes.
James Earl Jones,
Yeah.
like what's happening here? over
Oh,
here?
and poor Max von Sydow. Like the
Max
one
von
scene I
Sydow.
never ever needed to see was the one where he dies in the exorcism. Like we got that he died.
Yeah.
I don't need to. He doesn't need to play out the humiliation of his own death.
I like because Max von Sydow seems like he's the only one who's in on this. He's like going, I am going to collect this paycheck and it's going to be huge.
Yeah, I mean, good for him. But as far as the character, it was just like way to undercut it. The only
Well, and
the
let's-
only character who gets off worse in the whole series is poor Nicole Williamson.
Oh my
As
god.
Father Warning in
Yeah.
the third one.
Exorcist
Oh my
Just
three.
this
God.
tacked on, practically silent, no thanks.
Yeah, but
role.
he
Is anyone
used
else-
his Merlin voice.
I
Did you
know,
hear that?
It's so great. It's worth it just for
Has
that.
anyone else seen the Blatty cut of
We
Exorcist
didn't
3?
get it in
No.
time. So
Yeah.
is it
It all of that Nicole Williamson stuff is out
right.
of there.
No,
and
no
it's-
Jason Miller, right?
No,
Don't-
no Jason
No
Miller.
Jason
That's
Miller.
right.
No Jason
Yeah,
Miller.
Jason
It
Miller's
is-
not in.
No.
Jason
No.
Miller's not in the original cut. It was going to just be Brad Dourif as the Gemini killer in
You're talking
Karras's
about
body,
three.
but you never saw Karras's body. You
Huh.
just saw the Gemini killer.
So
And-
you're just told that Kinderman thinks it looks like Karras?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is.
So it's so funny because you get so excited
Huh.
when you hear that Jason Miller is coming back, right? But then
I
Brad
know.
Dourif turns in this amazing performance that you want to keep watching. And when they cut back to Miller, you're like, no.
No,
Bring
don't do
back
that.
Brad Dourif. Like
That's
it's this,
funny. I had the
it's this
opposite
insane
reaction.
making thing. Oh, I love Brad Dourif.
I
Love
wanted it.
him
I
in
mean,
that movie.
I
Wish it was on him.
love. He's got that amazing face, and
Yeah.
he does all the things.
Car-
But I was like, for the story they're telling, if it
Yes.
was the visual of Karras,
He
the whole
couldn't
time,
do
would
it,
have
though.
made I know. I
he
heard.
couldn't do it. And then
Well,
that's too
Michelle
bad.
Michelle referred to Brad Dourif's performance as outdoor Shakespeare, and I have to agree. It's a pretty broad.
But that's what he does. He does it
Playing
in
for the
Alien
last
4, and
row
he
the
does it in
whole
Lord of the
time.
Rings, and he does it on the X-Files, and that's his thing, and I'm there for it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Completely
I
there
do.
for it.
I do think George C. Scott's interpretation of Kinderman is very different than Lee J. Cobb's.
Miss Lee J. Cobb a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely. I would love to see Lee J. Cobb playing Kinderman as
Love
the
the
central
humor.
figure, because watching
Lee J. Cobb.
George C. Scott kind of pull out his George C. Scotts and like just have these explosive. I'm going to bang on table and I'm going to shout and then come back. I'm like, okay, I'm
just not
glad to see.
Kinderman.
Yeah, it's just not Kinderman exactly. And
And
I
Karras
also
was his best friend.
I
Okay,
know,
thank
but
you.
believe me, oh
Yeah.
my God, what? They didn't even get to go to a movie together. They don't even do it in the, they don't even get there in the book. Like I'm like, well, maybe there's more explanation for their friendship in the book, and there isn't. They said one conversation at the freaking track, and they're best friends.
I
15
can't believe
years
I'm
later.
even engaging in
What?
this conversation. I can't believe I'm talking about this.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, it is.
I will say, in George C. Scott's defense, they will see the big board.
Right. Oh man. Just
I also
like
feel bad for George C. Scott up on that wall,
Yeah.
like because you know he's
Yeah.
in a harness,
I
and that's a
know.
big guy.
Pain. Yeah.
hanging up there in that harness. I'm like,
Brutal.
oh, buddy, I'm sorry.
I did love the cut to the red-haired kid after Brad Dourif says it's child's play. That was
Yeah.
a nice little homage to something that didn't deserve it, but is
I do find it interesting that
the boom red-haired kid.
like there are two versions of the prequel. There are two versions of
Nobody can
Exorcist
figure it
3.
out.
No, it's Exorcist is an artistic vision that was allowed to be an artistic vision. You feel the Friedkinness of it and the William Peter Blattiness of it all,
And the tension
and
there.
it feels like a cohesive vision by people collaborating together. Everything else in this series, with the exception of the television series, which I think is actually a pretty solid series, but all of the theatrical releases feel like a war between studios who want an Exorcist movie versus people who want to make a movie. There's this that's why the Nicol Williamson stuff got added post in 3 was, well, it's called The Exorcist 3. You got to put it in Exorcist. It's like, and William
Peter Blatty's like, it's
I
called
didn't want to
Legion.
call it Exorcist 3. I wanted to call it Legion. It's like, well, now it's called Exorcist 3 and you got to put an Exorcist in it. I'm sorry. Those are the
They're
rules.
like, you
We
have
don't
to
make
put
the
somebody
rules.
from
We
the
just
first
make the
movie
rules.
in there. And they're like, great, we have 2 characters from the first movie in there.
Right.
Is that not good enough? And they're like, no, you need the actors from the first movie. So get Jason Miller, dig him up. What's he doing?
Now,
Doing
So-
theater in
so-
Scranton. Leave him alone.
having seen the director's cut, I gotta say, I think it's a much flatter movie. Like,
Yeah,
I
sure,
don't think
yeah.
Mm.
as big a train wreck as the studio interfered version is, the final version that was released to theaters, it's a more entertaining film. It's a more entertaining train wreck because I do like the cuts back and forth between Jason Miller and Brad Dourif. As misguided as that last minute exorcism is, it's so much better than him coming. Basically, George C. Scott comes back from the attack on his family, walks in the door and shoots him.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's completely anticlimactic. Chris Hainsworth, to your point, like they are constantly trying to find something that works, that satisfies what people think I think this is the thing. People think The Exorcist is one thing, and they fail to realize The Exorcist is a very special thing in that it does ground itself in reality. It's slow at times, and it spends so much time with the character. It's not a horror film for a large part of that movie. Like, it's not the scariest movie ever made for the first half of it, and
Except for
then
the Ouija board. That's terrifying.
But I think that's true. Like Jaws is a character study that's interrupted by shark attacks. It is
Mhm.
about this is a movie that's about these characters who experience this brush with something supernatural. That it's not a supernatural horror movie. It's a 1970s character study that has demons in it. It's a different approach to movies than we have now for the most part. That's an overgeneralization. There are people who are still trying to make those movies today, and sometimes they succeed and other times they don't. It's like almost everyone was trying to make an Altman movie at the time, conversations happening in the background that you're trying to listen to while people in the foreground are talking about something else. It's like watching the Get Back documentary. It's like, oh, Paul's actually writing Get Back in the background of these two having this main conversation, and I can't split my focus between them. That I appreciate.
Spielberg is still doing that.
Well, the astronaut, I mean, that whole you're gonna die up there. That if you don't pay close attention
I
to
missed that he's an astronaut.
him saying that he's an astronaut, you're just like, what? Wait, what?
That's
did you
why I had to watch it so many times when I was 7.
Right.
like there are
move
just
on.
these lovely little details that pay off if you're attentive.
I also heard something but didn't have time to verify it, that this movie was the first signaled the first change in the definition of blockbuster, whereas prior to this movie, blockbusters were things that everybody saw, and that when this movie came along, it started to be redefined as a thing that people saw more than once,
Mm,
with a natural progression to Jaws, which they saw more than they saw this many.
right.
Saw more times than they saw, and then boom, Star Wars, and
Well,
And then you had
also one of the things that
Jurassic Park.
contributed to this being the huge moneymaker that it was is that it got a true wide release. Before they used to have isolated markets, they'd go play New York and LA, maybe Chicago, and then they would gradually ease out into the other communities based on how popular they were. Is this going to play in Peoria was based on that mindset.
Right.
And so, but this one, they went full nationwide at one time, and they did it after the holidays because they knew
It was like
people
the day
were off.
after Christmas.
Yeah,
or
it was
something,
Christmas.
right?
Yeah.
They knew people were off
Late
from
December
work. They
1973.
knew people were looking for something to do, and
the
so it
kids.
became this colossal smash. And to your point, Katie, like, yes, the idea of it became an event. It became something you had to, and I think that's true for horror fans. It's this thing you kind of measure yourself up against. Can you handle watching
Yeah.
The Exorcist? There's you before The Exorcist and there's you after The Exorcist. And
Families who get traumatized together.
that's
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
Have something to talk about at family dinner.
That's right.
Yeah, it's odd because there are a few movies that I'm finally catching on the big screen these days. Like we saw The Thing last October, and that's the first time I
Thank
ever
you for
saw it
doing
on.
that.
You're welcome. It's the first time I'd ever seen it on the big screen, and that's when I was like, "Hey, Doc Copper has a nose ring." Things I finally saw. I got to see Apocalypse Now on the big screen last week in 70 millimeter for the first
My
time.
goodness.
So I don't know if there is going to be a 50-year big screen showing of this coming up, but this is something that I've never experienced. We watched it on a 42-inch screen. That's the largest screen I've ever seen it on. So sitting in a movie theater, a packed movie theater, watching that movie for the first time, I can't even imagine what that experience was
My
like.
God.
Did you see the version you've never seen, the 2000, when it had its release in the theaters?
No,
No.
I didn't get to see that.
Because I saw that, and we actually haven't talked much about that version, but I remember you're watching it with a 2000 audience,
Yeah.
and people were disappointed on many levels. It didn't live up to the hype.
Mhm.
And the other thing was that all of the little kind of quote subliminal images of Pazuzu, it became like the Where's Waldo,
Yeah.
where it's like, where are they going to show up next? Oh, he's in your glass of milk. He's on TV. It's like, I'm like, I
There
don't
was
need
no
to see
Fight Club
Pazuzu.
in that regard.
Yeah.
I don't need to see Pazuzu that much. I don't. And the ending that Blatty fought for and that Friedkin trimmed, where Dyer and Kinderman do walk off into the sunset together. Blatty's argument was, if we end with, if we end on Karras's death and, the McNeil's in retreat, then it feels like the devil has won, the demon has won. And we need to have some kind of redemption of that life and love goes on. And on the one hand, I'm kind of like, well, the demon kind of did, it had a pretty good, if it didn't win, it certainly, left a mark.
Mhm.
But I
Can
feel
I-
like that's where we need to end. We need to end with the stairs, that's where we start. That's where we finish.
Yeah. That the AC knows this. The Pazuzu image was my kryptonite for a really long time. And he has a t-shirt with Pazuzu on it that he's not allowed to wear around me. And I thought he was actually going to wear it today. I'm pleased that he's not wearing
I
it.
want to stay married. What can I say?
Because when AC is traveling and I'm here alone and sleeping by myself at night, I keep certain lights on. I mean, this is how scarred I was by my first viewing of the original. To this day, I do not keep all the lights off when he's not here at night. And I don't mind admitting that. And I think that fucking shirt glows in the dark. I'm not sure. But I don't want to see it. I don't want to know it. And on a completely different thing about the ending of the original, in our world of sequels and prequels and make more money, blah, 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 what I love about the original, not the version you've never seen, but the original theatrical release, is that in the end, when the car is leaving, we're seeing the McNeils leaving, you don't have that shot of Regan perhaps turning around,
Right.
like in The Omen, when we see Damien's face and the things, we don't have that. And I just love that, because that would be like the typical, oh, there's more and it's coming in 1977.
I find the ending sad. Father Karras doesn't win. He dies, but he loses. I mean, he doesn't get, the only way he gets the demon out of the little girl is to give it exactly what it wants. And then his final act is a mortal sin according to the rules of the church.
Although he does get a last confession.
Mhm.
So
Yes, he does get
Father
the last.
Dyer.
Yes,
so
Father
in
Dyer
theory, he's
does-
got a pass. In
Yeah,
theory, he
but
got
I mean,
his
he
last
does.
ride.
But you guys, he didn't die, because he comes back.
Oh,
in the
that's
third.
true. Or he did die, but then he clawed his way out of the grave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that made me so mad.
Well, according to the new trailer, Chris McNeil is now an expert
Right?
in exorcism.
Sure.
Yeah,
The
if-
world's
why not?
foremost leading expert.
Yeah. Quite frankly, if I had just seen the 2018 Halloween, I would be more excited about The
Yeah.
Exorcist. But unfortunately, I
Yeah,
saw the
you
two
saw the
sequels
other
to the
two.
2018 Halloween.
Mm.
And now I'm just kind of like really nervous.
What's going to happen now?
I mean, I shouldn't say I'm nervous. Much like people who talk about like, well, George Lucas ruined my childhood. No, he didn't.
No, he didn't.
That movie
Your
still exists.
expectations did.
Yes,
Well,
that movie
is
still
everybody-
exists, and it's a important memory to me. The Exorcist existed. It, no matter what sequel anybody makes,
Yeah,
it's
doesn't
not going to
change it.
take away that experience for me.
Agreed.
Thank you.
But I
Is
am
everybody
sort of
here planning to see the new one?
Probably.
I'm a wait and see.
Yeah. Yeah.
If the reviews come back and they are universally panned, I'll wait till it comes on the streaming service. But if not,
But you will watch it eventually. That's the
Yes.
thing. All of you.
I mean, we
will
watched
watch
the
it
other
eventually.
two
Well, Katie's a
Halloweens.
completist with this series, so
Yeah. I mean, I
Sure.
kind of have to.
And I watch everything. So
Yeah, Chris
that
watches-
is just
Unequivocally everything that comes out.
yeah.
It's just
Sorry.
a question of whether I see it too. Yeah. But I mean, I would like to see it in the theater if it is not panned. I like Leslie Odom Jr. a lot. So
Oh, yeah,
for him.
he's lovely.
and I like the majority of David Gordon Green's work. The majority of it.
but wow, those two Halloweens suck.
Well, we had a whole conversation.
I'm sure,
Anybody who wants to watch the
Yeah,
Halloween
Yeah.
Watch that.
Check that
H2O
out.
versus Halloween, the sequel, the
2018?
2018.
Oh,
We watched
Oof.
H2O and we watched the 2018. Kind of did a little compare contrast of the returns of Laurie Strode.
Yeah.
But to put a button on this one, I just want to go around. If you have a favorite moment in The Exorcist that you'd like to call out, and while you're thinking on that, I will tell you mine, or at least I'll tell you two because I already mentioned one of them. But one is that boxing sequence
Mm.
because it has nothing to do with the story and yet tells us so much about Damien Karras. The other thing is the moment when Marin enters the room for the first time. And in the book, the demon says, "This time you're going to lose," which they ported over to Exorcist 3.
Yeah, poured it over
But
a lot of stuff.
in the movie, as you were talking, Chris Hainsworth, they do it with a look that they recognize each other. They recognize each other as the ancient enemies that they are. And both of them kind of strap in and be like, and here we go. So those are two of my favorites. Let me bounce to Mandy.
Damn. Because I'm sitting here trying to think. I mean, I don't know. The whole thing is fantastic. I think on this last rewatch, one of the things that stuck out to me the most was Karras going to visit his mom, and just the art direction of that apartment is so heartbreaking and like sad. It's just that sticks out to me. But the thing that has always stayed with me is the sound of Regan's shivering breathing after the first round of exorcism, and just like it just rings in my brain forever and ever and ever.
It's a simple moment, but Kinderman asking Chris McNeil for the autograph
Oh,
is
I love
it's
the
that.
thing that,
oh,
you know, and then being like, I love it. It's
so
for me. Then
manipulative.
he's like
Oh.
spent this entire time sort of like being this gruff detective with her, and then he just sort of like fanboys out. That's just in this classic horror movie. That's the moment that I kind of respond to the most.
No, thank you. Because that is, again, that's one of those moments. I think, Michelle, you even said something like inappropriate.
It was so gross, but it was so well done.
There's a great little moment where Damien is getting caught up. He's in the language lab at Georgetown or in the Jesuit community, whatever it is, where he's listening and listening and listening, and somebody comes in the room and he just gives himself a jump scare. That's nice. But I think every frame of this movie could be, at one point, has probably been my favorite frame of it. It's such just so beautifully constructed. Chris screaming 88 doctors and not one of you can possibly, like, it's just all that stuff sits with me. Her frustration, her fear, her helplessness, her in the shot of Reagan in her room and her on the phone with the hotel in Italy because her fucking husband's on a yacht on Reagan's birthday, and Sharon desperately trying to pick up the papers and help her and take it over. And it's just that all feels so, and these are scenes you come into in the middle of and then are jumped right back out of, just to give you that little bit of information. But ultimately, it's in the version you've never seen. My favorite moment is when Father Merrin tells Damien that it's to get us to despair and to believe that God can never love us. That is, to me, the crux of the whole thing.
A couple moments stand out. One is tied to what you said, AC. The like 30 or so seconds leading up to Merrin entering the room for the first time, there's this kind of like slow movement of him going through the house and up the stairs, and it keeps going back and forth between his moving and the camera getting closer to Reagan's face, and just like the expression on her face knowing he's coming, and his walk up the stairs knowing what he's about to encounter, like has this just incredible build to this confrontation that you it just creates this anticipation that I find thrilling every time I see that.
It is, as Katie said, there are so many just gems throughout. And if you've watched it a lot, they each one will kind of resonate in a different way. I used to, as a younger fan, I would fast forward through the Iraq scenes, and now I absolutely love them. I'm like, I love that slow build. I love that random. It's just
that
a line.
guy who doesn't want to let him go. That his friend at the digs.
Yeah.
They hug and he walks. Oh God.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just a line in the novel, but the cart that nearly runs Merrin down.
That's that's right out of the book.
It's like there's just all these and again, I kind of go back to what I said at the beginning. I can't believe how much of this screenplay made it on screen. And I really give Friedkin a lot of credit in that regard, because yes, I'm sure it was a great adaptation by Blatty, but Friedkin's decision to keep so much of that and find ways to incorporate those little moments so that they inform, don't distract, and keep things progressing.
The whole beginning of the book is loaded with so many semicolons. It's phenomenal. Like, it's just these little phrases, descriptive phrases of sentences. There'll be like 4 or 5 semicolons in a sentence. And really, mostly just in the Iraq thing. Like, he writes that part differently than he writes the rest of the book. There's still way too many semicolons in the rest of the book, but they're mostly in that thing. And so many of those tiny little phrases and descriptive little vignettes show up.
Well, and how
Friedkin's film,
and how funny that part of the film is so different than the rest of the film as well. I feel like Friedkin's picking up on that, going, "This is different than this."
Yes, this is another world.
Yeah. Oh, again, coming back to sound, the sound of that segment was just really chilling.
Yeah, I mean, starting the movie off with the Islamic call to prayer is such a fascinating choice. The other moment that I had thought of that I want to remember is, so the character of I think her name is Sharon, who's sort of Chris's assistant throughout the whole movie. I hadn't thought about her much in previous viewings, but this last time through, I was just kind of like, "What's up with this person?" Because she's just a rock for this family, and does so much. And then at the very end, as they're all
Yeah.
after the,
Like,
the epilogue,
She's like, oh,
packed
Bubba.
up, and
no
then
mas.
there's just that one last line where Chris asks her, "Are you sure you don't want to come?" And she just says, "No." And like the fact that she stuck through everything that happened with that family, saw it all through, made sure it had as good an ending as it could, and then she's like, "Okay, I'm done."
She's a
That was
very good assistant.
Yes.
fascinating.
And
He gets a
capitalism-
boyfriend in the book. The guy who shows Reagan the horses in the movie when Reagan's talking about going horseback riding.
Oh yeah.
In the book, that's Sharon's the guy she's seeing.
Oh.
The
did
guy-
not
And we know
remember.
capitalism is the true enemy because those poor servants had to stay in those jobs because they couldn't afford to quit. So that's the real horror.
They've
right
been
there.
Sharon
with the
wanted her job
McNeils for
back,
many
came back.
years.
Yes. I'm sorry. Hey, my daughter's possessed. Well, that's great.
They're not.
2
They're not
weeks,
from
2 weeks is good.
Georgetown.
Do you mind I'm going to take my vacation that I've built up and give you my 2 weeks notice. And good luck. Good luck.
They've been with the
whole
family a
thing-
very long time. They didn't live there.
The whole bit in the
Uh.
party where Bert's trying to get Carl to admit he's a
Oh,
Nazi.
God.
Oh
Yeah,
my god.
That was
that's
so
important. That's
Oh.
important because it
I'm
makes,
Swiss.
it makes Carl a suspect.
After the sequence of the power of Christ compels you, when Marin says, "All right, take a moment and we'll start again," I was like, "Oh fuck! Oh no, there's more. You have to keep." Oh, that really landed hard for me. And also listening to the tape. The moment you mentioned, Katie, when we're hearing the voices and it's starting to, oh wait a minute, it's English backwards. What? That's as bad as if she's speaking a language how is she doing that? That was sick. And the one image that always sticks out to me that I used to look away is that quick image of her on the bed and the statue behind
her.
I found
Mhm.
that absolutely
Is
terrifying.
the statue in the original version? Or is it just
Yeah.
her on the bed?
Yeah.
I also love
And-
Damien screaming, "You're not my mother." That's
Oh,
breaks my heart
God.
every
Yeah.
Oh, the whole mother thing. Yeah. I mean, there's AC. How dare you ask favorite moments of the first one? That's
Yeah.
just an impossible.
We're just naming
impossible
every single scene.
question.
in the
I know.
movie.
I know.
I figure anybody who hung in here this long would be like, well, what about this? Why didn't you talk about this?
All of it. It's a perfect movie almost.
In the book, the exorcism goes on for a week.
Yeah,
Like it just
Mhm.
goes on and on. And there's a whole
they bring a
sequence-
cardiologist in.
That's right, because the demon starts slowing her heart down, and it's like
Yeah, that's hugely important too because it goes right into Damien's guilt. The demon says you shouldn't have given her the lithium, and
Right.
that's really Damien. From that point on, the rest of the exorcism is like, I am killing her because she can't sleep and her heart is going to give out. It's very explicit and terrifying.
it's a great note to end on. Thank you all so much for chatting about one of my favorite movies. I'm really thrilled that everybody kind of came and brought their own experiences to it, because I really do feel like this is a movie that everyone has kind of a Rorschach to it as well, that you're going to bring to it what you are already carrying with you. Much like the demon, he uses our own fears and insecurities against us.
Stop.
And Southwest Wind.
Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.